Okay, I'm here with Tom Rowlands. This is Ralph Morton, the UK editor for Global Fleet Management. We're at the Association of Fleet Professionals conference, and it's predominantly about EVs. Now, Tom is VP Strategy at Allstar, but while you gave us a fantastic presentation about home charging, road charging, and the route for EVs for fleets, what I would like to ask you about, and what many fleet managers are now facing, is the huge rising cost in diesel. We're now hitting £1.80 a litre. What would you suggest to fleet managers they can do about ameliorating this rising costs?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of simple steps that fleet managers can try to take to alleviate some of the costs. So obviously control over where drivers are fueling. So obviously expensive motorway sites are still more expensive than other sites. They can take products like discount diesel, where we're able to help with offering discounts in that space. I think the other thing though is really around efficiency, and making sure that the drivers are driving on the correct routes, they're driving in the best way, so telematics can obviously help with efficient driving. And then the other piece is obviously looking at their vehicle estate. So you don't necessarily have to transition to a pure BEV to get increased fuel efficiency. You can get newer ICE vehicles that are far more efficient than older models that will reduce fuel requirements. But also there's the FEV option for hybrids and other options. But it's a really challenging time, and the market is incredibly volatile. So there's limited things that people are able to do to impact that.
Thank you for that advice, Tom. Turning back to EVs for a second, which was obviously what you were talking about here this morning, what advice would you give to fleet managers who are starting that transition process? What would you say were the key points to think about?
So I think the first thing I always advise fleet managers to do is just to do their research, to absorb as much information as possible. There is a huge amount of information available. I would also speak to their current suppliers. I think they'll be surprised that that many of their current suppliers are involved in this space, who can often provide advice and also other connections. So if, for example, with Allstar, a fleet manager approaches us, we're able to pass them on to partners who are potentially better equipped than us to help them. For example, in the hardware space, we've got lots of hardware partners who will happily pass customers on to for advice around site surveys, around which hardware they should be installing. We're happy to pass people on to companies like Diode, who are able to help survey the fleet to understand which drivers and which routes are more optimal for EV. So I think research and planning is key. You don't want to just jump straight in with transitioning someone to an EV without really thinking it through, because it is a very different proposition. And then I think it's really about winning hearts and minds and getting some good use cases in first and getting some advocates in the business. So transitioning those people who are keen to get into an EV versus those who are potentially more resistant. And once you've got advocates within the business, I think it breaks down a lot of the barriers to those who are potentially more wary of EVs and used to their diesel. So those are a couple of things. And then before you kind of go ahead and order the vehicles and whatever else, just be sure that you've got your plan in place and your hardware in place and your charging solution in place before you go ahead and order the vehicle and think maybe I'll figure it out as I kind of go along, because I think a lot of people have done that and really struggled with reimbursement and employee issues, and then people potentially hand back the vehicle and kind of refuse to get into an EV, and then you cause yourself a hearts and mind problem with some of the other drivers.
Tom, thank you very much for that advice. This is Ralph Morton for Global Fleet Management at the AFP conference.